October 14th of the Israeli and Palestinian territories map, also known as the Gaza-Israel War. Juzzy here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and practical approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in this region. And it's now been almost exactly 1 week since the Hamas militant group from Gaza launched its initial assault operations into Israeli territory, and alongside that with firing thousands upon thousands of rockets into Israel as well. However, the dust has far from settled as we now head across to the map, as Hamas continued firing another round of rockets into the Israeli territories, including Ashkelon and Ashdod, but also closer to central Israel as well. So we're talking near to Tel Aviv. I'll zoom out for that one. There it is. However, this smaller rocket barrage attempt was by and large neutralized by Israeli air defenses. And so the only other Hamas and Israeli military engagements in the last day were much closer to the border, including at Eshkol, where mortar firing from Hamas wounded 4 civilians, and also close to the border once again was 4 rocket impacts into Sderot, with no injuries reported in that instance. And of that, several rockets were also intercepted as well. However, 3 ambulances were damaged in the latest barrage on the town. But I do need to switch gears for the moment and move across to the north of the state of Israel, where it borders with South Lebanon. As additionally, there were some continued engagements in the north here with the Hezbollah fighters and the IDF, as the Israeli army responded to explosions at the border fence in Hanita, with just some minor damage reported. As such, Israeli forces didn't ignore these acts and retaliated with artillery fire into Lebanon. Interestingly, Hezbollah claimed responsibility for attacking 4 Israeli sites overnight. That incident included the interception of drones and even a surface-to-air missile launched from Lebanon itself. As a result, an Israeli army spokesperson's response was such that, quote, "Every incident is the full responsibility of the state of Lebanon and will bear the consequences," in what is all a very clear sign of Israel not looking to back down to aggression from the other side. Then as we move across to some of the IDF engagements or military actions that have been largely based in the Gaza Strip itself, of course. But firstly, again, as a precursor to Israeli air raids on Gaza Strip Hamas targets, the Israeli army had informed the residents of Gaza that between the hours of 1000 hours and 1600 hours, that it allowed for the free movement between specific streets for civilians in Gaza City itself, in order to create a humanitarian corridor that would allow the residents to flee to the south. However, it has also been reported that Hamas has been actively telling the residents of those locations to ignore the IDF's stated safety instructions. And as for the Israeli Defense Forces air raids, or specifically the Israeli Air Force, they continued to strike Hamas terrorist targets and anti-tank missile launches in Gaza, so the city itself, immediately after they were used to attack Israel. Also of note, Israel penetrated a small distance into the Gaza Strip using tanks and armored vehicles, which could indeed be a sign of things to come with an actual IDF ground invasion, with partially the intent to rescue hostages, of course, but obviously partially the intent of eliminating any Hamas militant forces on the ground also. But it can also not be understated that Hamas's literal taking of civilian hostages in this war is made only more heinous by the fact that they disproportionately took many, many more women and children as hostages. Then, as we move a bit further down south, all the way to the end, in fact, as the IAF, so the Israeli Air Force, continued to strike prominently on Hamas positions in the Rafah region once again today, which is, of course, very close to the Egypt's border. Now, in terms of recent announcements from the Israeli government, the Israeli Minister of Communications has just stated yesterday that Israel will stop all internet services in the Gaza Strip. Now, there is actually some level of dependency on communications infrastructure inside Gaza from Israel, but it appears the communications minister is rather referring to taking out communications towers and other various comms infrastructure that Hamas would otherwise use to plan its military engagements against Israel. And the taking out of, or at least decreasing, an enemy's ability to communicate, thus coordinate, obviously has its military advantages. And as for the military hardware aspects of all of this, we already know that the IDF has its indigenously produced and highly effective Iron Dome air defense systems and their Merkava Mark IV tanks. But lesser known is the Israeli Navy's newest and largest missiles, the Sari 6s, which have been used for the first time since they were implemented just last year. And their targets have already been Hamas rocket production and storage facilities, which is quite the critical target against Hamas's better interests, with their limited abilities to produce this weaponry on the scale like that of any larger conventional military. Then, as for international responses or updates, so the Jordanian foreign minister called for a strict international stance to stop the Israeli escalation in Gaza. Then, Egypt has taken what they themselves quoted as unprecedented measures to reinforce its border with Gaza and prevent any breaches. Then also, President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, visited Israel, stating that she was in the Kfar Aza, one of the epicenters of the atrocities committed by Hamas last weekend. She also said, quote, "The horror of what happened here is unspeakable. We mourn with the families of the victims." Meanwhile, Israel's position has continued to adamantly state that Hamas has indiscriminately slaughtered innocent Israeli civilians, which, add to that, there's been no shortage of footage coming out, filmed by Hamas militants themselves. In one instance, they indiscriminately shot at bathrooms during the Nova Music Festival on the Saturday morning, in yet another display of absolute savagery with no value for human life whatsoever. And so Israel is certainly intent on rooting out the entirety of the Hamas leadership and all their militant factions as well. Now, what I'm going to do is end out this video with some Hamas footage from prior to this conflict that shows their own videographic evidence of what they do, ripping up the Gaza Strip's water infrastructure pipelines to use for rocket production. And infrastructure, no less, that was paid by international aid. And it's quite unusual, really, for a number of reasons, not the least of which is that it's their own self-condemning propaganda. Just strange. Thus, one assessment that the vast majority of analysts are coming to collectively agree on is that, in the very least, Hamas is the enemy of, in fact, the Palestinians and the Gaza Strip itself, as they effectively steal from the populace for their own militant goals. So thanks for watching, guys. That's the end of the video today. Please feel free to leave a comment, that sort of thing. And I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers.